Now, we've been discussing the developments with the new COVID rules this morning, and part of Boris Johnson's Plan B restrictions include COVID-19 vaccine passports for large indoor and outdoor gatherings in England. That's from the 15th of December. And the vaccine passport scheme has already been introduced in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, but has been met with backlash from some in the hospitality industry.
Yes, indeed. Well, leaders in the industry say the scheme will likely cause conflict between staff and customers, reduce trade and affect the hiring of staff during a time of national staff shortages. But we're joined now by Chris Southworth, the Secretary-General of the International Chamber of Commerce. The ICC first put forward, actually, the idea of vaccine passports. Thank you very much for joining us. Initially, I think it was seen, wasn't it, as a way for us to get back to normal, really, and get out of this pandemic and keep the wheels of business turning. Do you still feel like that's the right thing now, especially with things like mandatory vaccinations coming in? Do you think it's gone a bit far?
In terms of vaccine passports?
Yes.
I mean, we advocated very strongly at the beginning, and still do, that we need vaccine passports in order to maintain international travel. And that's no different, by the way, to having, yellow fever vaccinations. If you're going into a yellow fever zone, the precedent is already there. What we are advocating for is, safe travel for international business, business travellers in particular, but also for the travel industry more widely. I think, what's infuriating at the moment is we're all here talking about a number 10 Christmas party when what we should be talking about is vaccinating the world. And just, by the way, looking at the numbers, if it's going to cost us $4 billion $4 billion a month in terms of economic disruption, the vaccine funding gap is $16 billion. So within 4 months, we could have actually, for the same cost, vaccinated the whole world. To put that in context, but particularly in places like Africa, where vaccine rates are very low. But until we get to a place where those vaccine rates worldwide are higher than the current 40%, and certainly higher than the sort of 2 to 3% in places like Africa, we're going to have this constant, endless disruption to our own economy. And that's just completely unsustainable. Yeah. So that's the infuriating point. We're being distracted when we should be talking about
sure, yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate you are the International Chamber of Commerce, so you are taking that international perspective. But lots of people will be waking up today with the new rules imposed here and will be concerned about what's going on here in Britain. Do you think vaccine passports have become quite controversial? And we do have a very high vaccination rate, don't we, here? I think 8 in 10 eligible adults or something like that have been double jabbed. So what exactly is the purpose, the science behind how effective vaccine passports are? And I'm talking here about domestic vaccine passports.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the case of international travel or cross-border movement, I think there's a very strong case for vaccine passports, and there's already precedents, like I say. I think it starts to get into a very grey zone when you're talking about people's personal spaces and environments. There's an element of common sense. If you're in public spaces that are busy, then the sort of common sense approach would be to wear a mask to protect yourself, protect your family, protect the people around you in your own communities. That sort of makes sense. But I think it does need a lot more debate, because when you start to impose that on people's personal lives, then obviously it starts to infringe on this civil liberties issue, and that obviously needs a lot more public debate. From a business point of view, I think it's quite straightforward. Business confidence, by the way, in key sectors like hospitality is already at ground zero, has been for a long time. We cannot drive growth, jobs, investment until we have that certainty and consistency. So if you're in the hospitality sector, you must be sitting there with your head in your hands right now, because this is devastating. At the busiest period of time, you're just trying to get your businesses up and running after a long period. And here we are now putting restrictions back in place. The point is this is avoidable. That's my point, is guess where this Omicron has come from? It's come from the least vaccinated part of the world in Africa. We could have solved that problem a year ago at least. So, yes, it's a domestic problem, but it's not. You can't disconnect that from the global challenge. That until we get everybody vaccinated, we can't get on with our lives. That's the point around the domestic conversation. So we can't have just be looking at what we're doing within the UK. We've got to look at it, in a much wider perspective, and then solve the fundamentals, because ultimately that will lead us out to some sort of normality in terms of economic growth on a sustainable basis.
Yeah, look, absolutely, and I do completely understand what you're saying. I'm just going to put the other side of it, really, which is that a lot of people would say that creating vaccine passports, etc., has the potential to create a two-tier society, and maybe in some sense a two-tier world as well. Because if you can't travel without them, then I suppose that's a restriction on people's lives, and that can be seen to potentially be an infringement on people's civil liberties, can't it? And potentially their bodily autonomy if they then go and feel like really they have to go and get a vaccine in order to function, right? So. Is that a concern for you? Are you concerned that that's a knock-on effect of these vaccine passport proposals?
Yeah, absolutely. Because until we get to a place where we can operate safely and we can operate in a consistent environment, it has a direct impact on the economy. And those numbers are big. 4 billion a month. That adds up. We've already seen an enormous economic impact. You mentioned it yourself that our children are going to be paying for this for years to come. So, this will go on and on and on until we deal with the problem. That's the key. And I think around the civil liberties issue, it needs an awful lot more public debate as to where people feel comfortable, what they're prepared to accept. But ultimately, it boils down to personal responsibility, doesn't it? To be sensible, responsible, and be safe so that we don't have deaths or hospitalizations. And keep those around us, healthy and with, a good sense of well-being.
Yeah, and I think that's good advice to end on. Thank you, Chris
Cheers,
Southworth, the Secretary General there of the International Chamber of Commerce.